In a world where voices determined value, one child changed history without speaking a single word. In 1859, as society judged intelligence by speech and skin color, a young black boy sat before a piano and shattered every belief with the touch of his fingers. The moment the first note rang out, the room fell silent. What followed sounded impossible, music so rich, so precise, and so emotional that listeners compared it to Mozart himself. He did not explain his gift. He did not tell his story. He did not speak at all, and yet, through melody alone, he commanded attention from a world that refused to listen to people like him. His music traveled where his voice could not, into hearts hardened by prejudice and minds trapped by expectation. This is the story of Thomas Wiggins, a silent genius born into injustice, whose soul spoke fluently through sound. It is a story of wonder and heartbreak, of brilliance rising in a broken world, and of a truth that still echoes today. The most powerful voices are not always heard with the ears, but felt with the heart. In 1859, at a time when the world was deeply divided by race, slavery, and inequality, a moment of pure astonishment unfolded, one that challenged everything people thought they knew about intelligence, talent, and human potential. A young black boy sat at a piano and played with a brilliance that listeners compared to Mozart himself. The shock was not only in the beauty and complexity of the music, but in one haunting detail. The boy never spoke a single word. This child was Thomas Wiggins, later known as Blind Tom. From the very beginning, his life was wrapped in contradiction, silence paired with sound, limitation paired with genius, and invisibility paired with global attention. Born into slavery in the United States, Thomas lived in a society that refused to see black children as fully human, let alone capable of greatness. Yet, the moment his fingers touched the piano keys, that cruel belief began to crack. As a child, Thomas showed an unusual sensitivity to sound. He could remember melodies after hearing them just once. Everyday noises, the rhythm of footsteps, the creak of doors, the hum of voices, seemed to live inside him. While he did not speak, his mind was alive with patterns, tones, and harmonies. When he encountered a piano, it was as if he had finally found a language that belonged to him. Observers were stunned. He could reproduce long, complex compositions perfectly after a single listening. He played with emotion, precision, and creativity far beyond his years. Audiences who had spent their lives listening to trained European musicians could hardly believe what they were hearing from a young enslaved boy. Some were moved to tears, others were simply speechless. In an era obsessed with proving black inferiority, Thomas's talent felt almost impossible, something people struggled to explain. Emotionally, the story is deeply mixed. On one hand, there is wonder, the joy of witnessing pure genius rise from the most unexpected place. Music lovers felt awe as Thomas filled concert halls with beauty that transcended race, language, and status. His performances created moments where listeners forgot their prejudices, if only briefly, and surrendered to the power of sound. On the other hand, there is sadness and injustice. Thomas's life was not his own. Because he was enslaved, others controlled where he went, what he played, and how his talent was used. He performed endlessly, often treated more as a curiosity or spectacle than as a child with emotions and needs. While audiences praised his gift, they rarely questioned the system that denied him freedom, education, and basic dignity. The silence of Thomas's voice adds another emotional layer. People often assumed that because he did not speak, he did not understand. Yet his music told a very different story. Every performance suggested a rich inner world, one filled with memory, emotion, and intelligence. His silence forces the audience to confront an uncomfortable truth. We often underestimate people simply because they communicate differently. The lessons of this story are powerful and timeless. First, it teaches that genius can exist where society least expects it. Talent is not limited by race, disability, or background. When systems of power decide who is worthy, they often overlook extraordinary potential. Thomas Wiggins stands as proof that brilliance does not need permission to exist. Second, the story reminds us that communication is more than words. Speech is only one way humans express themselves. Music, art, movement, and emotion are languages of their own. Thomas spoke through sound, and his message reached across continents and generations. Third, it exposes the cruelty of exploitation. Even as people admired Thomas's gift, many benefited from it without caring for his well-being. The story challenges us to ask hard questions. Are we celebrating talent, or are we using it? Are we honoring the person, or just the performance? Finally, the keynote leaves us with a sense of quiet inspiration. Despite a world that denied him freedom, voice, and choice, Thomas created beauty that could not be ignored. His music did what he could not do with words. It demanded attention, respect, and remembrance. In the end, the image of a silent boy commanding a piano in 1059 is unforgettable. It is a reminder that some of the loudest voices in history never spoke at all, and yet they changed the world forever. Though he never spoke a single word, his inner world was anything but silent. In the life of Thomas Wiggins, music became more than talent. It became language, emotion, memory, and identity. Where words failed or never came, sound rose to take their place. Every note he played carried thoughts he could not explain, feelings he could not name, and a genius the world struggled to understand. From early childhood, Thomas lived in silence. He did not speak to express joy, fear, or curiosity, and this silence caused many around him to misjudge him. In the 19th century, especially in a racially unjust society, silence was often mistaken for emptiness. People assumed that because Thomas did not speak, he did not think deeply, feel strongly, or understand the world around him. But they were wrong, deeply wrong. Thomas experienced the world through sound, ordinary noises, the rhythm of rain, the clatter of dishes, the footsteps of people walking, captured his attention. These sounds did not fade away. They stayed with him, arranged themselves in his mind, and returned later as music. It was as if his brain recorded life itself and translated it into melody. When he sat at the piano, those stored sounds came alive. The first time people heard him play, they were stunned. His fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, producing music full of emotion and complexity. There was joy in his fast, playful runs. There was sadness in his slow, heavy chords. There was even tension and drama, as if the piano itself were telling a story. Listeners felt that he was speaking to them, even though his mouth never moved. This contrast, a silent boy creating thunderous beauty, became the heart of his story. Audiences leaned forward, trying to understand how someone who never spoke could communicate so clearly through music. Many were moved to tears, not just by the skill, but by the feeling that the music was deeply personal. It did not sound mechanical or empty. It sounded alive. Emotionally, music gave Thomas what the world had denied him, a voice. When he played, he was no longer invisible. People listened. They paid attention. They felt something. Through music, Thomas could express excitement, sorrow, confusion, and wonder, emotions every human carries, whether or not they can name them. His performances proved that silence does not mean absence of feeling. Yet there is also deep sadness in this truth. Because Thomas could express himself only through music, others took control of that expression. He was placed on stages, paraded before crowds, and expected to perform endlessly. While people admired his genius, few tried to understand his inner life beyond the piano. His emotions poured out through music, but the world rarely poured compassion back into him. Still, his music remained honest. He did not play to impress. He played because it was natural, because it was how he existed in the world. When he recreated a piece after hearing it once, audiences gasped. When he added his own variations, listeners realized this was not imitation. It was creativity. His genius was not borrowed, it was his own. One of the most powerful elements of his story is how music erased barriers. Language, race, and social status meant nothing once the music began. People who might never have listened to a black child in 159 listened when Thomas played. In those moments, the piano forced them to confront a truth they preferred to ignore. Intelligence and beauty do not belong to one group of people. The lessons from this keynote are profound and lasting. First, it teaches us that expression takes many forms. Not everyone speaks, writes, or explains themselves in expected ways. Some express through art, movement, sound, or silence. When we limit our definition of communication, we risk missing extraordinary voices. Second, it reminds us not to confuse difference with deficiency. Thomas's silence led many to underestimate him, yet his music revealed a mind of astonishing depth. The story challenges us to look beyond surface behaviors and ask what someone might be expressing in other ways. Third, it shows the power of art as survival. In a life where Thomas had little control, music gave him structure, meaning, and presence. It was how he connected to the world and how the world came to know him. Art, in this sense, was not entertainment. It was necessity. Finally, the story calls for empathy. Thomas poured his emotions out through music, but too few people listened with their hearts fully open. His life asks us to do better, to listen more carefully, to honor the person behind the talent, and to protect those whose voices sound different from our own. In the end, Thomas Wiggins teaches us a quiet but unforgettable truth. Some of the most powerful voices in history never spoke at all. They sang through strings and keys, through rhythm and harmony, and through emotions too deep for words. His silence did not weaken his story, it made it impossible to forget. His extraordinary talent did not rise in a fair or welcoming world. It emerged during one of the darkest chapters of American history, a time when racial injustice was not hidden, but legally and socially enforced. This painful reality is what makes Thomas Wiggins's gift not only astonishing, but also deeply heartbreaking. His genius shone brightly, yet it did so against a background of cruelty, limitation, and denial of basic humanity. In the mid-19th century, black people in America, especially those born into slavery, were denied freedom, education, and ownership of their own lives. Society was built on the false belief that black minds were inferior, incapable of intelligence or refinement. This belief was used to justify enslavement and abuse. It was into this world that Thomas Wiggins was born, already facing barriers before he could even understand them. When Thomas began to play the piano with astonishing skill, his talent directly challenged the lies of his time. Here was a black child enslaved, unable to speak, yet capable of musical brilliance that rivaled the greatest composers in history. His performances forced audiences to confront an uncomfortable contradiction. How could someone deemed less than human create something so profoundly beautiful? For many listeners, the experience was shocking. Concert halls filled with people who had never questioned the racial hierarchy they lived by. As Thomas played, those beliefs began to crack. His fingers moved with confidence and sensitivity. His memory was flawless. His sense of harmony and rhythm was extraordinary. The music left no room for doubt. This was true genius. Emotionally, this created a powerful tension. On one side was awe and admiration. Audiences were amazed, even inspired. Some felt they were witnessing a miracle. Others spoke of him as a natural wonder, unable to explain his ability within their limited world view. His talent brought moments of unity where people of different backgrounds sat together, equally moved by sound. But alongside that awe lived deep sadness and injustice. Despite the applause, Thomas remained enslaved. He did not gain freedom because of his talent. He did not gain control over his life, his schedule, or his earnings. His music filled rooms with joy, yet his own life was bound by restriction. The same society that celebrated his genius refused to recognize his full humanity. This contradiction is what makes his story heartbreaking. His gift was extraordinary, but the world around him was cruel. People praised the music, but ignored the system that trapped the musician. They clapped for his performances while benefiting from his lack of freedom. In many cases, his talent was exploited, used for fame and profit without concern for his emotional or physical well-being. There is also tragedy in how people explained his genius. Instead of accepting that a black child could be brilliant, many described his talent as something unnatural or accidental. Some called it instinct rather than intelligence, as if his mind played no role. These explanations were another form of injustice, ways to protect racist beliefs while still enjoying the music. Yet Thomas's talent continued to shine, regardless of how it was explained or misunderstood. Every performance was an act of quiet resistance. Without words, without protest, his music told the truth. Brilliance knows no race. His existence alone challenged the foundations of a society built on inequality. The emotional impact of this story deepens when we consider what Thomas himself may have felt. While we cannot hear his voice in words, his music suggests complexity, sensitivity, and depth. Imagine possessing a gift that brings joy to thousands, yet living without freedom. Imagine being celebrated yet never truly seen. That emotional distance between praise and dignity adds a layer of sorrow to his legacy. At the same time, there is something undeniably powerful in his endurance. In a world designed to silence him, his talent refused to disappear. It demanded attention. It crossed boundaries that laws and prejudice tried to enforce. Even in chains, his genius traveled freely. The lessons from this keynote are vital and still relevant today. First, It reminds us that talent can survive even in the harshest conditions, but it should never have to. Genius does not require oppression to exist, and no society should rely on suffering to produce greatness. Second, the story teaches us to examine how we celebrate talent. Are we honoring the person or just consuming their gift? Appreciation without justice is incomplete. Applause without empathy is hollow. Third, it challenges harmful assumptions about race and intelligence. Thomas Wiggins stands as historical proof that these ideas were always false. His life exposes how prejudice blinds societies to truth, even when that truth is playing directly in front of them. Finally, his story urges compassion. Behind every extraordinary ability is a human being with needs, emotions, and rights. When we ignore that humanity, even admiration becomes another form of harm. In the end, Thomas Wiggins's talent shines like a bright light in a dark era, but that light also reveals the shadows around it. His gift was remarkable because of its beauty and heartbreaking because of the world that received it. Remembering his story is not just about celebrating genius. It is about learning from injustice and choosing to do better. Society did not know what to do with him in a world that depended on words, spoken commands, written laws, and rigid definitions. Thomas Wiggins existed outside the rules. He did not speak. He did not explain himself. He did not fit into the narrow boxes people used to measure intelligence or worth. Because of this, society struggled to understand him. Yet, in a powerful contradiction, his music understood everyone. It crossed borders that language, race, and status could not, breaking barriers no words ever could. In the 19th century, communication was closely tied to value. Those who could speak well were considered intelligent. Those who could not were often dismissed. Thomas's silence confused and unsettled people. Some assumed he lacked awareness. Others treated him as a mystery or a curiosity rather than a human being. They searched for explanations that fit their beliefs, but none truly did. Silence made them uncomfortable. When Thomas sat at the piano, however, everything changed. The moment music filled the room, misunderstanding gave way to connection. Listeners did not need explanations or translations. The melody spoke directly to their emotions. Joy, sadness, excitement, tension. All of it arrived clearly and instantly. People who could not understand Thomas as a person suddenly felt that he understood them. His music reached places that language often fails to reach: the heart, the memory, the shared human experience. This contrast became a defining part of his life. Offstage, people struggled to relate to him. They debated what he was, what he understood, and how to classify him. On stage, those debates disappeared. As he played, there was no doubt. The music was confident, expressive, and deeply human. It did not ask for permission. It did not wait to be understood. It simply existed, and it demanded to be felt. Emotionally, this created moments of rare unity. In an era divided by race and class, audiences sat together, equally moved by sound. People who might never agree on words found themselves sharing the same silence as a piece ended, holding the same breath before applause. In those moments, music did what speeches and arguments could not. It reminded people of their shared humanity. Yet there was sadness beneath this power. Society listened to the music but often failed to listen to the person. People praised what Thomas produced while remaining uncomfortable with who he was. They spoke about him rather than to him. His inability to speak became a wall in their minds, even as his music tore down walls everywhere else. This struggle to understand him reveals a deep flaw in society itself. Instead of expanding its definition of intelligence and communication, society tried to force Thomas into its existing limits. When he did not fit, it labeled him other, and yet his music quietly exposed how unnecessary those limits were. Without a single word, he proved that understanding does not always come through explanation. It often comes through experience. One of the most powerful aspects of his story is how music became a universal bridge. Language divides people by region, education, and culture. Music does the opposite. A melody can be felt by anyone, regardless of background. Thomas's performances connected people who shared nothing else. In doing so, his art challenged the idea that language is the highest form of human expression. The emotions in this keynote are layered and complex. There is frustration as society fails to fully see him. There is awe as his music achieves what words cannot. There is loneliness as understanding comes through sound but not through personal connection. And there is hope because his story shows that barriers, no matter how solid they seem, can be broken. The lessons here are especially important. First, the story teaches us to broaden our idea of communication. Not everyone expresses themselves in expected ways. When we only value one form of expression, we risk silencing extraordinary voices. Second, it reminds us that art can unite where language divides. Music, in particular, has the power to reach across differences and remind us of what we share. Thomas's life proves that connection does not require explanation. It requires openness. Third, the story challenges us to look inward. Why do we struggle to understand people who are different? Why do we demand translation before offering respect? Thomas's music asks us to listen more carefully, not just with our ears, but with empathy. Finally, it leaves us with a quiet truth. Understanding is not always intellectual. It is emotional. Society could not explain Thomas, but it could feel him. And in that feeling, something real and transformative happened. In the end, Thomas Wiggins stands as a powerful reminder that language is not the only path to meaning. While society struggled to understand him, his music spoke clearly, honestly, and universally. It crossed lines that words never could, and in doing so, it left a legacy that still resonates today. At its deepest level, this story carries a message that reaches far beyond history or music. It reminds us that intelligence, talent, and humanity are not measured by speech, race, or society's expectations, but by the soul. The life of Thomas Wiggins quietly challenges the rules by which the world decides who matters, who is capable, and who deserves to be heard. From the moment Thomas entered the world, society had already judged him. He was black in a racially divided era. He was born into slavery, where people were treated as property rather than human beings. He did not speak, which many took as proof that he did not understand. By the standards of his time, Thomas was expected to be nothing. Yet inside him lived a depth of intelligence and feeling that no label could contain. When Thomas touched a piano, those false judgments collapsed. His music revealed memory, structure, creativity, and emotional awareness, all qualities linked to intelligence. He could hear a piece once and reproduce it perfectly. He could blend sounds, improvise, and create beauty that moved listeners deeply. None of this required spoken language. His mind worked differently, but it worked brilliantly. This is where the story becomes powerful. Society often defines intelligence by how well someone speaks, reads, or explains themselves. But Thomas showed that intelligence can exist without words. His understanding lived in sound, pattern, and emotion. His mind did not follow the usual path, yet it reached extraordinary heights. The story forces us to question how many people throughout history have been dismissed simply because they did not fit expected forms of expression. Emotionally, this realization is both inspiring and painful. It is inspiring because Thomas's gift proves that the human soul is far richer than any system designed to measure it. It is painful because his life also reveals how often the world fails to recognize that richness. People admired his talent, but many still refused to grant him full humanity. They praised the music while ignoring the person behind it. Race plays a central role in this lesson. In Thomas's time, racist beliefs claimed that black people were naturally inferior. His existence directly contradicted those ideas, yet instead of rejecting racism, many tried to explain his talent as an exception or a mystery. This response shows how deeply prejudice can blind people, even when truth is right in front of them. Thomas's story reminds us that talent and intelligence have never belonged to one race. They belong to humanity as a whole. There is also a powerful lesson about expectations. Society builds narrow definitions of what success, intelligence, and worth look like. Anyone who falls outside those definitions is often overlooked or misunderstood. Thomas did not meet expectations. He shattered them. His life shows that expectations are not truths. They are limitations imposed by fear, habit, or ignorance. Despite everything stacked against him, Thomas's humanity shines through his music. Humanity is not only about speech or freedom, it is about feeling, creativity, and connection. When audiences listened to him play, they felt joy, sadness, wonder, and awe. Those shared emotions formed a human bond stronger than words. In those moments, the distance between us and him disappeared. Yet the tragedy of his story is that this recognition was often temporary. Once the music ended, society returned to its old rules. This reveals an uncomfortable truth. It is easier to admire talent than to respect humanity. It is easier to applaud than to change. Thomas's life asks us to reflect on whether we truly see people, or only what they give us. One of the most important lessons here is dignity. Every human being carries dignity, regardless of ability, background, or difference. Thomas did not need to speak to deserve respect. He did not need to fit expectations to be valuable. His soul, expressed through music, was enough. The story urges us to treat people with dignity not because of what they produce, but because of who they are. Another lesson is humility. The world often assumes it knows how intelligence should look. Thomas reminds us how wrong those assumptions can be. His life teaches us to listen more carefully, to remain open to forms of brilliance we do not immediately understand, and to accept that difference is not deficiency. There is also hope in this message. If intelligence and humanity are defined by the soul, then no one is truly voiceless. Some speak through words, others through art, movement, kindness, or resilience. When we learn to recognize these expressions, the world becomes richer, fairer, and more compassionate. In the end, Thomas Wiggins's story is not only about a musical prodigy. It is about redefining what it means to be human. His life challenges us to look beyond speech, race, and expectations, and to see the soul beneath them. When we do, we honor not just his legacy, but our shared humanity. That is why his story still matters. It reminds us that true intelligence is not always loud, true talent is not always understood, and true humanity is not granted by society. It already exists within us all. In the end, the story of Thomas Wiggins does not fade into silence. It lingers like a final note that refuses to disappear. A boy born without a voice in a world that refused to hear him rose to command attention through music alone. In 1859, when race, speech, and status decided a person's worth, Thomas sat at a piano and proved those rules wrong. With every performance, he revealed a mind of astonishing intelligence, a heart full of emotion, and a soul too vast to be confined by labels. His life unfolded as a painful contrast. On stage, he was celebrated as a miracle, a genius whose music rivaled the greatest composers. Offstage, he lived within a system that denied him freedom, dignity, and understanding. Society admired his gift, but struggled to accept the truth it revealed, that brilliance does not belong to one race, one voice, or one definition of intelligence. His silence confused the world, yet his music united it. Where words failed, melody succeeded. The emotions of his story are layered and lasting. There is awe in witnessing talent, so pure it defies explanation. There is heartbreak in knowing that such beauty was born into injustice. There is anger at a society that applauded sound but ignored suffering, and there is hope, quiet but powerful, in the knowledge that even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit can still create something extraordinary. Thomas Wiggins leaves us with lessons that echo far beyond his time. He teaches us that intelligence is not measured by speech, that talent is not limited by race, and that humanity is not granted by permission. It already exists within the soul. His life challenges us to listen more carefully, to see more deeply, and to honor people not just for what they produce, but for who they are. As the final chord fades, one truth remains clear. Thomas spoke to the world without ever speaking at all. His music broke barriers language could not, and his legacy reminds us that the strongest voices in history are sometimes the ones we learn to feel, not hear. That is why his story still matters, and why it will never be silent.